Decision fatigue is real, especially as an agency owner. So you've got client choices to internal ops, hiring, pricing, volume of decisions that you have every week, frankly, is just overwhelming. And when everything feels like it's on you, it's easy to either slow down completely or make choices that you're going to ultimately end up regretting later, just kind of needing to make a snap choice. So in this episode, I want to break down practical ways to reduce decision fatigue and ultimately be able to make better choices, better decisions. And so we're going to cover frameworks of decision ownership, how to evaluate risk more clearly, and how to build a solution-oriented culture so that not all things are going to come to you, and that ultimately you can have a clear job of yes or no, but not needing to think through all the nuances of every single decision that needs to make. And so here, let's start with the sort of cost of decision fatigue. The reality of it is that it really truly just drains your energy and it creates delays in your own workflow and your team. So the reality is that the larger of a team that you start to grow, you end up becoming a bottleneck in potential and indecision and being able to have an issue of being able to actually make the number of decisions. And it actually creates for so much nuance, so many different considerations that it is just overburdensome to your own nervous system. And if you're in a place where you don't have all the information to even make the choice in the first place, it actually creates for a bad choice. There's a reality of there's so many pieces around the initial stages of business that actually create for reality of it is that I feel like it's a bit of an inevitability at a certain stage of business that you have to feel in order to change and actually make a discernible difference in how it is that you go about making choices. But at the first stage of business, and the reality is, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, that you know that the risk ultimately falls on you. And with that risk, it ends up creating a dynamic where you want to be involved in the decision because you end up feeling like if a bad decision is made, the wrong choice is made, that the reality of it is that it falls on you. And while that is true, that the ultimate thing ends up, the buck stops with you in the end, that if you are not actually allowing yourself to grow, it ends up creating greater risk in the long term. And so what is it that you have as a risk that you're willing to live with? And so you don't actually have to have everything going through you. And the reality is that mistakes are going to happen. And that each one of those mistakes that ultimately do happen is an opportunity for you to be able to learn from it. And as time progresses in your own entrepreneurship, in your own business, in your own agency, is that over time, you are going to not have the capacity to make these choices and you're going to have to give them off to other people. And as that starts to happen is a bit of a change, not only in mindset, but in practicality of it. And it becomes a necessity at some stage. It is a difficult stage for every entrepreneur to get to, frankly, but it is a skill that you're going to have to learn. And the shorter time that it takes you to learn it, the better off you're going to be. It took me a long time to learn it. And it happened in the most obscure way where I learned it. And there was a lot of my own ego, my own belief in self-worth that was tied into the busyness, into the decision-making, into people relying upon me for those decisions that ultimately created for it, for myself and for my business. But the reality is that it doesn't have to be that way. And you likely don't even really want it to be that way. And it becomes such a problem, and it actually letting go of pieces of it is a big catalyst for your growth. And so if you're in a place right now where you're feeling like you are starting to get to aspects of decision fatigue, where everything is falling on you and you are the block in the funnel, hopefully you learn the lesson faster than I did and being able to move through it. But the reality is that when you're in this place, in this kind of what I was describing as the inevitability, is that it ends up creating this piece that you're training your team because of that. You're training your team to come to you to make the decision. And so you end up diluting or even de-incentivizing their own free thinking to solve the problems on their own. And so they end up coming to you for every decision that needs to be made. And so you're creating for this block in the funnel yourself, and you're making it happen. And in order for you to be able to escape from it, you're going to have to change the way that you engage and the way that you show up with your team. And you're going to have to retrain them to start to be free thinkers themselves with limits that allow for them to come with solutions, allow for them to start to not rely on you for every decision that needs to be made. And there's this really simple framework that was initially brought forward by Dan Sullivan called the 1-3-1. And so as he describes it, it is called 1, identify the true core of the problem. And so there's nuance to this piece. And I don't know if this is Dan Sullivan specifically, but you've got the known problem, the problem that you have in front of you, the unknown problem, and then the hidden problem. And what you need to do is really understand what is the core of this actual problem that you have in front of us. And then I want the team member to come with 3 potential solutions to solve this issue, and then their 1 recommendation. And so what's important here is for them to start to think through what are the possibilities, what are the things that could potentially solve for this problem, and then start to come with that recommendation. And very frequently, to begin with, they are going to come with the wrong solutions and the wrong recommendations. And you need to not solve the problem. You need to have them go back and consider them again. And did you consider this? Did you consider this? Did you consider this? And so this process empowers the team to come prepared to you, not just to simply escalate the problem to you, but to come prepared with potential solutions. It helps create clarity in communication. It starts to build that decision-making skill across your team, because it is a skill. And it shifts the responsibility away from you decide what needs to happen, which you're still doing in that circumstance, is here's my thought. What do you think? Do you approve? And allows for you to be able to have a bit of a different dynamic. And it's the first stage to removing yourself from this block in the funnel where you are in this constant place of needing to be the solution to every problem. The piece that becomes really important here, that is a bit of a difficult thing to learn, and as I was talking about at the beginning of the episode, is that for us as business owners, we see and we know and we recognize that ultimately we hold the risk that that buck does stop with us. And it's important to recognize that we over time have developed a skill of understanding and looking out there in the world for the potential risk factors. And not every decision holds that same weight. Some have higher risk, some have lower risk. And being able to determine exactly what that risk is allows for us to be able to understand which pieces are we willing to delegate the risk to, and understanding kind of different tiering of the types of risk factors that are being assumed within the team. And the reality of that is that as time progresses, we get better and better at this skill. And so what I want you to be able to do is you're having your team start to understand how to assess risk, and being able to go through these different risk tiering is understanding what is the risk to the agency, what is the risk to the team, what is the risk to the client, what is the risk to finances, and having an understanding of what is the risk factor. Like, what if it all goes wrong? What is the worst case scenario in this situation? So that you have an understanding of what that actually looks like. And so each one of us have different risk tolerances. Every single one of us do, myself against all of you, and the same even within my own team. We all have our own different risk profiles. And so depending on what you have as your own risk tolerance, you need to be able to start to delegate. So low risk in this scenario, I'm going to go ahead and delegate it to someone else. Medium risk, I'm going to go ahead and collaborate with the team to be able to understand and make sure that I'm not missing something. And then high risk, that it's still something that you maintain and retain the decision-making power over. And it's really clear on the kind of delegation-oriented mindset as well. It's like, what exactly is the authority that someone has in decision-making power? And so being able to start to remove the lower risk items from you, that is going to limit that decision-making fatigue from where you ultimately feel. And then finally, the piece that I think is important for you to start to instill across the entire team is the solution mindset. So I want you to stop. I don't want you to be asked anymore of what we should do. What I want us to be able to start to respond with, and not answer the question that is being asked, what should we do in this scenario? It's what have we considered? What have we already tried? What have we thought about? What were the solutions we explored? What is the risk profile already here? And the reality is that any evolution in a career results in some wins and some failures. And I want us to start to create the framework, the playing field of people being able to feel comfortable testing things, trying things, going and venturing out into new potential within the agency, and starting to reward the team for bringing solutions, not just problems, rewarding the team for trying new things, and celebrating when someone takes ownership. The reality of that epiphany that I was talking about earlier, that I realized years ago now, is that if I was standing in a place that someone else cannot occupy the exact same space that I'm occupying, that I have to first move out of the way in order for someone else to be able to take that ownership or take that space that I'm in. And so you need to start to vacate, and I'm not saying abdicate responsibility, but vacate the space that you're currently in to allow someone else to be able to do so. And as people take that ownership, as people take that responsibility, as you give them opportunity to do so, you'll be surprised in how frequently, how often your team wants to take on this responsibility and wants to rise to the occasion. And so I want you to start to reframe problems that you're having within your agency as process breakdowns, as resource gaps that we currently have that we need to fill. And as we start to fill each one of these gaps, that we are getting closer and closer and closer to a more humming, well-oiled machine. And so I want your team to think, how can they go about solving the problem? Not just what to do, but how do they actually, I want you to start to train them on how to think, not just what to do. And so there's so often around this idea of process that you're giving them step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. And don't get me wrong, that is a reasonable step depending on the level of person. But eventually, as you start to have a leadership team, you're going to need to start to be able to delegate outcomes and delegate a thing that you want to have come to fruition. I want to overhaul our entire project management system. So that means evaluating software. That means picking which ones are going to have the right utility set, which ones are going to integrate with other platforms, all those things that ultimately are the micro decisions that lead to the larger decision of what to do. And then the decisions, even how to set it up and train people and all that you ultimately don't have the time to do because you're working on something else within the business. And as time progresses, you have to remove yourself from more and more and more and more. And you have to have a team around you that knows how to think, not just step 1 to step 100 of what it is that they need to do. And then eventually, the place that I want you to be able to get to is that your job as the CEO, as the owner, is eventually to be able to get to a place where you, unless you're the person that is responsible for this specific department, for this specific action, your job should become yes or no. You don't need to be doing all the thinking, all the nuance. You may question a couple of things that allow for you to be able to make the full decision, but there's certain authority that you've been able to delegate to your team, and then there's certain authority that you're holding. And for the ones that you're still holding that authority to make that choice, your job is a yes or no, but not to evaluate all the different opportunities, to figure out which direction to go and then ultimately make the final choice, but to just make the final choice. And understanding those levels of delegation is incredibly important. So there's a distinction in level of delegation of, I want you to just go do some research and then come back to me with the research. Or I want you to go do some research and I want you to come back to me with some analysis of that research that you've done and your number one takeaway. Or I want you to go do some research and then I want you to go determine your number one takeaway. I want you to make a decision of the direction to go. And then I want you to come to me to make the final choice. Or I want you to go and do that, all the same things. And then I want you to implement and then let me know after the fact. And I just want to be informed. And so thinking through the different levels of delegation that allow for your team to actually move things forward with or without you. And the reality is that there's certain pieces of this responsibility that people will want to take on, that they'll want to assume, that it allows for them to be able to move forward themselves in their own career. But there's also the reality of that if you are in a place and you're the type of manager that when something goes wrong, you overreact, you're going to create a scenario where they are not going to want to make choices because they're not going to want to be the one at fault. And so make sure that you are not only responding appropriately to when things go wrong, but you're also making sure to understand and be able to even celebrate the reality of trying something new and going in another direction, because each one of us know that in our own successes in our career, there has been a substantial amount of learning lessons that we've had. Call them failures, call them whatever you want, but they were learning lessons. And that it's important to allow for your team to go through those. Obviously, you want to try to mitigate as many of them as possible to make them move faster as quickly as you can. But the reality is you're not going to eliminate those learning lessons from the team. And frankly, I wouldn't be where I am in my career if I hadn't learned many of them. And I had to learn them directly myself in some instances. But decision-making does not need to be exhausting. With the right frameworks, with a solution-oriented, focused culture, clear boundaries on what risk profiles and risk tolerance you have and the team should have, can reduce the friction and move you faster as an agency with more confidence. Start using as simple as just the 1-3-1 with your team. Look at the decisions that you have through that risk lens of what is the risk of this all goes badly. If you feel stuck in the end, simplify the process. Get to a place where a yes or no is often all that you need in order to be able to move your business forward. The reality is that if you are making decision after decision after decision, no wonder that by the time you get home at night, the last thing that you want to decide is what you're going to eat for dinner. Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening in today. With all of the shifts in the industry, it is easy to feel overwhelmed or unsure of your next move. So I'm not here to try to sell you anything. I just want to give back and guide you through the uncertainty. Whether you're navigating new trends or just need some clarity, we're here to listen and offer advice. Head to creativeagencysuccess.com/chat to book a free 15-minute chat with an agency mentor who can provide you with a fresh perspective. Let's figure out the best steps for your agency's growth together.